I saw with my own eyes what awaits us after death. Neurosurgeon Eben Alexander. I have often heard from patients that after cardiac arrest, they were transported to amazingly beautiful places where they met with deceased relatives. As a neurosurgeon, I have always believed that such experiences are associated with brain disorders. However, my beliefs changed when I myself went into a coma for a week due to a serious illness, recalls Eben Alexander. During all these days, my brain wasn't fully functioning. I compare this state with a TV turned off. As soon as it is disconnected from the electricity, the screen goes out. But despite this, I continued to see the world I found myself in. He was so real that now earthly life seems less important. Nevertheless, I began to appreciate her even more, realizing her true value. The neurosurgeon shares his impressions. The death of the physical body does not mean the end of consciousness. About 10 years ago, Eben Alexander experienced something unusual. When his body was put into a coma, his consciousness was in darkness. This darkness was unlike Earth's. It could be compared to a murky mass into which one could plunge. Recalling this experience, Alexander described this place as the world as the worm sees it. In this thick darkness, he couldn't remember who he was. At first, he felt like a part of this viscous substance, but gradually his perception changed. Eben realized that he was not a part of this dark matter, but only abiding in it. He decided he had to find a way out. As soon as he thought about it, he saw faint rays of light coming from an unknown source. Alexander concentrated, trying to figure out where the light was coming from. It was like an opening through which the rays penetrated. Realizing this, the doctor began to climb rapidly upward. Flying through this gap, he found himself in a completely different world. To get there, you just had to think about it. Finding myself in this other world, I felt as if I had been born for the first time, as if I had never had any other birth before. This is how Eben Alexander describes his first impressions. What did he see in this new world? Eben hovered above the mysterious land, watching the dense thickets that resembled forests on Earth. Although it wasn't our planet, he felt something familiar, as if he were returning to a place from his childhood. You can forget such places, but when you return there, you realize that they have always been in your memory, and it brings joy. Traveling through this world, Alexander flew over forests, fields, and lakes, noticing people dressed in simple but elegant clothes that were in harmony with the world around them. He did not hear the words. The knowledge came to him as intuitive revelations. He was told that he was surrounded by love, that he was being watched, and that there was nothing to be afraid of. However, he also realized that his stay here was not for long. Soon, Eben found himself back in that same darkness. In this state, fragments of memories from his earthly life began to return to him, which he had not remembered all this time. He remembered that he had a family, but the names of his wife and children were unknown to him. He thought again about the hole through which the light had penetrated, but it was already closed. When I woke up in the ward, earthly life seemed insignificant to me at first, but that feeling quickly disappeared. Thanks to this experience, I realized that life on Earth has a deep meaning, recalls Eben Alexander. During his stay in the other world, he understood why there is good and evil in our world. On Earth, we have freedom of choice, and our spiritual growth occurs through this choice. Choosing between good and bad deeds, we develop our spiritual side. Alexander is sure that this is the meaning of our life on Earth, the development of spirituality through love and compassion. He writes about this in detail in his book, Proof of Heaven. In 1965, I heard his incredible story. At that time, I was studying at the Faculty of Psychology and did not believe in the existence of life after death. However, Dr. Ritchie's account of his experience completely changed my beliefs, and I decided to seriously study this phenomenon, says psychiatrist Raymond Moody, known for his research on life after death. The story that happened to George Ritchie in 1943 is truly amazing. At the age of 20, he was hospitalized with severe pneumonia, and doctors pronounced him dead. He remained in this state for 8 minutes. George Ritchie described his impressions of this period in detail in the book Return from Tomorrow. George Ritchie's journey began when he turned 20. He was drafted into military service, but during his service he contracted pneumonia and fell into a coma. During this time, I was listed among the dead, but my consciousness did not disappear. Perhaps what I saw at that moment was given to me in order to dispel fears and misconceptions about life and death, George Ritchie said. That day, he regained consciousness in a hospital room. Feeling better, he decided to go out into the corridor and inform the doctor about his condition. Walking through the corridors, he noticed a doctor with a tray of instruments. George approached the doctor, but the doctor ignored him and continued walking. Trying to avoid a collision, Ritchie shouted loudly to get his attention and abruptly stepped aside. He was shocked when he noticed the ring with the inscription 19 and 45. This moment was a real shock to him. He couldn't believe that all this was happening to him, George Ritchie recalled. He began to think about his dream of becoming a doctor and how he was going to celebrate this moment with his family soon. It seemed impossible now. George confessed that he had never felt so lonely and confused before. He desperately wanted to be with his loved ones. As soon as this thought occurred, he suddenly found himself at the walls of the hospital. It seemed to me that I was moving at an incredible speed, much faster than an airplane. I saw the lights of cities and wanted to stay in one of them. Suddenly, I found myself on the sidewalk of an unfamiliar city. That's when I realized that my thoughts control my movements, George Ritchie said. Near the cafe, he saw a man who turned up the collar of his coat to escape the cold. Ritchie tried to ask him where he was, but the man walked past without noticing him. At that moment, George realized that he had become invisible to others. He stood on the street of a strange city, feeling lonely and lost again. Ritchie understood that even if he returned home, none of his family would be able to see or hear him. George Ritchie decided to return to the hospital room. He tried to remove the sheet from his body, but all his efforts were in vain. George was confused, not knowing what to do or where to go. It caused him agonizing feelings. Suddenly, he noticed how the ward began to fill with light. At first, he thought that someone from the staff had turned on additional lighting, but the light was getting brighter. Its brightness was so incredible that it is difficult to put into words. It was like the light coming from multiple welding machines. It wasn't until some time later that George realized that a creature made entirely of light had entered the room. At that moment, the walls of the hospital disappeared, and he saw his whole life from birth to the age of 20, George Ritchie recalled. After he saw his life, he was transported to other dimensions. According to his stories, these are the places where souls go after death. The first dimension he visited was in close proximity to Earth. Here George observed the souls of people who suffered from loneliness or quarreled, hating each other. He called this place the abode of unhappy souls. Then, together with the being of light, he ascended to higher realms. There he saw amazing parks flooded with a strange but warm light. There was joy and harmony in this place. His next stop was an unusual laboratory. The tools he saw struck him to the core. George couldn't figure out how they worked. It was only 10 years after his experience that he saw a photograph of the first nuclear plant in a scientific journal. The picture shocked him because it reminded him of what he had seen back in 1943. Dr. George Ritchie also told the students about his ring. Now he did not see it during the vision, but with ordinary vision. He was convinced that he had been brought back to life on Earth so that he could share his experiences with others. George wanted to show that everyone is capable of turning the material world into a paradise if they put their efforts into it. After he came back to life, George went to the very city where his soul was staying. This place was already familiar to him. He instantly recognized the street that led to the building with the cafe sign. When I approached this cafe, I was overcome by a strange feeling. I got goosebumps because I was already here when I was interrupted. After all, death is a great illusion, said George Ritchie. Write in the comments what you think about these words and whether you believe in life after death. Dear friends, thank you for watching my video to the end. If you liked it, please like it and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. It's very important. Thank you and have a nice day.